We're about ready to get started. Mamaroneck, if we could get your emails in the chat, please.
Hi, I made the mistake of leaving the Zoom, so I don't have your speaker positions or anything. So if you all could resend them, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Derek went to the bathroom, so just don't start there when you see it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, no worries. I still have to read the little introduction, so we have some time.
Which tutorial is this?
That's a great question. I'm going to go find that out right now. Okay. Welcome to the Richard B. Sadikow tutorial. I am AU John Petruzzi. I'm a sophomore debater at Emory University. The participants in this debate are North Broward representing the affirmative. The first affirmative is Jay Gopal. The second affirmative is Dev Gopal, and Mamaroneck representing the negative. The first negative is Veronica, and the second negative is Derek. The evaluators of this debate are Professor Hearn, Professor Kessler, and myself. You may now begin.
Is anyone not good for me to start the 1AC? Perfect. Plan. The United States federal government should enact substantial criminal justice reform and habeas corpus procedure in sentencing in the United States. Advantage one is court power, unchecked discretion, in writs of habeas, suppresses judicial supremacy, milk of law. Those who reduce the power, good down, rights, the executives, loading courts, precedent, loaded for courts of fashion relief, positions. Habeas will be no challenge to the executive rules or not a reason for habeas on labor divisions against the judiciary losing check on power without will challenge the executive. The actual behavior the courts will lose their constitutional power. That's the bedrock of democratic resilience and signaling. Only setting judicial guidelines solves tradition behind 16 constitutional for law or community process and the institutional or signals if you have interpreted and the judiciary one limited power to counter to position to settle boundaries. If there were no if the judiciary were not, there were no check on all the constitution, it would be meaninless. The entire purpose of the constitution to enforce majority democracy cannot survive. Momentary intervention. Congress is incapable of policing the constitution. Congress creates threats. Foundational principles. The democratic government solves nuclear war disengagement, unleashes power vacuums that escalate how this is in America. Work alongside tackling global challenges. The isolation not working American states, Africa, Europe, Latin America, and the least solution. Authoritarian ideology on Russia trying to fill a vacuum. Given the rights, that's what we mistake against democracy. Challenge challenge for the countries from the entire system would need to be shorter countries less parts spiraling into war. Here instead, leadership is not doing resources, not agriculture competition, just for the law, problems to spread and create threats. The most empirically and methodologically rigorous evidence goes affirmative on DPT. Writer 17 scores messages across the thirds of white side content studies. There's because constant ideas, democracies fight shorter wars, audience constitutional resolve democracies, use mediation as a methods, serve different informs, colors, connect survey responses, authority for frustrating individual studies for shorter wars, and other autocracy causes war. Yes, men, discourage Republic, and Chronic, 18, statistical slash revealed, regime ties determined for victory, more democracies, truth, where they want to to conduct, leaders connect for validate and for by constant measures, leaders tend to be yes, men, autocracy, to make a lesser from the on war because they know where the battle box, they're less to have the best of democracies, 100% wars, democratic leaders, scores show democracy, fight shorter wars, authoritarianism causes nuclear war and crisis, orts, 18, there's a future authoritarian, this would be a war with the escalation of nuclear conflict, administration, military robots, and disasters. These stand the way of solving global problems. Supreme Court clarification of the scope and procedure and habeas positions, revitalizes court power, independently sets clear demarcation authority that preserves separation of powers. Milko 12, the court is not just revealed, procedure and sovereign habeas, the court left the scope for local courts to find habeas, the court from the court the scope of the court's authorities, the court for shocking clauses, habeas, the law courts, written power, the court have the power to order release with no determination that the circumstances inconsistency cases for close the execution should not be second guess, separation of powers, prevents nuclear miscalculation. Adler 96 get irrational unaccountable behavior. President Thomas has been discredited. The implications of power need accountability and nuclear need for participation in addition to initiate war disputes with the executive legislative have nothing to do with that. Response to the resolution policy execution on recipe the lot of and unaccountable operations short argument expertise in this IR groupthink exacerbated inexperience in IR experience is key defining tool of judicial power and raising executive deference. Milko 12 the court must the rules of should be responsible to the court this determine the balance of power the court should answer the review the balance of the court political questions the court left habeas on finance has given deference against this sort of fashion law with no further checks on issues been foundation for clarification of the people's guidance the very nature habeas is strong judiciary deference check habeas without giving court some of the power making this the right face no force the precedent of a review executive constraints global preemption war no terms executive power may be good but only if justice will object power agrees reaction to the words flown 8 the scope of executive power if I allow the president's inherent the influence of the states I push search forces self-defense I see sort of right on defense include rose states every has been recurred as war the business of AI lost necessities that is power the executive shall allow the states going to hire use cash weapons or genes turning important order to norms and issue use power consequently such consequences powers coming in reaction constraints to obstacles of the performance of executive but regarded as misguided advantage to is judicial independence the plan promotes global rule of law and shores up court leadership domestically Sharfed on 9 precedent if I rule law enforcement states come to follow the US has grapple with overall law on primacy of law is important this court for primacy and bounty the TC rights habeas the cases that has implementation governments will use a person say the rational public advice students and states Uganda Nepal Somalia Sudan now they just for the work and immigrants I try to accept precedent authority against overreaching section rule law legislation impunity about Indian will reform religion rule law subscript powers Davidson more 16 education for independence education the way to undisputed course contribute to conflict resolution when states want to resolve dispute country action to legal test force a rule has come to save states foreign norms by legitimate authority that journalists comply policy can coordinate policies the government would capacity emails direction for the legal process to shape different constitutions nor disappear the court office for complaints the legal resolution be a signal for cooperation this models of global judicial independence sharp at all 9 the clients of course guns and use judiciary state watch and the different results on actions in the US adopted the course of the foreign states all the lead states with independent justice system allies US and the interests are represented the government if the US is committed to law effects of firm studies judicial allies sharp at all 9 at least for study of the course of the world aside from decisions this court is on influence on international courts that there's overseas trade and international litigation following American law the legislation is started to be much such that the influence not limited from starting UK of course looks to this court is supporting the rules that's how populism is spreading globally now as care of 17 Marxists were liberation and accommodation the external rules populism is personalities the web of corruption reinforces the executive course of ensuring how everything has to be populism reinforces competition with democracy at risk of democracy on battle for someone that distract around the world of course it refers to the national governance of public dreams sense of challenge tradition independence that rule hold back policy and course a challenge and avenue of repair populism prevents the exercise of liberal international amazing and charge system prone to erupt and escalate every major hotspot 17 populism focuses on problems and solution. It makes it difficult to comes from problems. For questions like the voice maker role, was alliance that should be more democracy. I pose for no under that such actually leaders imagine the as a distance maybe a little middle or late Obama 16 foreign policy is better. Middle later responding after SS not Russia on international foreign policy can only given to the prompt Trump says he makes sense skip defense Russian national government and countries of the British environment citizens as detailers as a part of the principle as national policy needs to be early solvency establishing alternative grounds for habeas relief publicly events scope and litigation section 20 this court also was a federal defended to review to receive your local litigation involved defamation or doctrines of policies and litigation and the rights of course of the rest of the habeas having less of for enforcing justice definitely property exemptions discovery review the habeas server for litigant actions or convictions, but in addition shall be relevant to ability to review the defense establishment as a separate basis for relief out of the court, not relief, but not dispositive rule. Only versus Supreme Court hostility solves experimental reviews of legal admin 18 he filed habeas corpus ruling against address maybe the discretion of habeas corpus is no longer possession of precision knows who has discarded rights out habeas is recognized the constitution for courts monitor state precision rights or social limited for review this court reclaims a search regard of course presume state fast quickly enough and it could not consider possession of yes and claim not because the court required that state orders harmless the court required no obstacles for habeas the Supreme Court and habeas are both key sharp and online the process will have impact on law enforcement some therefore no bodies follow this court habeas is referred to as the leader reason I have a highly independent role of habeas national movements in Europe prove the judiciary is key on he and now the 16 national movements in Europe screening department shifts global international rights on high springs on essential questions international norms and domestic efforts international law has limited power in courts there's on the pushing back away diffusing norms abolishing carry tangible power so national security and political position of course engagement with institutions treasury president office promote the presence of international norms domestically now T9 now concludes course right 13 implemented is not to limit data to find out of course according to rules on the Thompson Bell 6 it was on first law the plus law includes judicial presence at court may enact law federal courts enact in CJR filtered out on a held within criminal committee process court not for review by president of these for the new court procedure SCOTUS and acting habeas Murphy 17 for acting habeas courts act justice for child support 39 courts and acts of justice habeas court natural rules just one the Supreme Court natural rules or rules for rules habeas the federal courts so procedure applies habeas court natural rules or reform market to rule making reason for procedure rules doesn't make reforms in the rules that we're making resolution context enacting law is distinct from enacting reform Northwestern 21 national law does not have a technical meaning as you said as and declared definitions has law is entirely a different question would be presented appeals court agrees about 9 natural rules to prevent appeals the U.S. government definition because FJC no data the rules enable actions were enacted rules of procedure it's just as manifestation hood 87 arguments that are enacted only applies to legislative middle list of worship or some yes and don't have a hearing or have a bearing.
Okay, you good? What habeas protections exist in the status quo?
We think that right now the lack of habeas protections is the problem, i.e. the court is being hostile towards reviewing the state claims. Sentences are not able to be sued by the people who have like
the first advantage. Your internal link card is from 2012. How does that substantiate an internal link to executive power with regards to NA?
Well,
Or
obviously it makes a broad thesis claim that sort of the DC court is the one that's making habeas decisions right now and is deferring to the executive. I don't know if you can point to a change recently because like if you have evidence
the courts are losing unhighlighted to wait that's the it says there's been genuine concern that the courts are losing then you only highlighted the courts are losing. How does that substantiate a brink argument to the democracy stuff?
Well, the courts are losing and there's been genuine concern that the courts are losing. It seems to be the same statement to me.
Okay, if the card is from 2012 then when does democracy collapse?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a specific date. Like it's like 3 days from now. 5 hours. Like it's like the longer that we wait, the higher the probability that democracy collapses.
Who's the agent?
United States federal government.
Could Congress solve?
We think that the court is the most efficacious actor, but Congress could solve some of the affirmative.
Would Congress solve the advantages of judicial, like court power and judicial independence?
Well, no, but Congress would probably save like 1 life, 2 lives.
Do you claim an advantage off of saving those few lives?
Well, I mean, that's better than the status quo, so it's not presumption.
Okay. Gitmo, how does the plan get rid of it?
Well, we never said the plan gets rid of Gitmo. Where'd you get that?
Well, your internal links seem to assume
no internal links say that. Point to line.
Okay. The judicial independence stuff.
Oh, you're moving on. Okay,
huh?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Judicial independence, how does that stop war? Or at least, how about what protections exist in the status quo that the plan would substantially change to prevent a war?
Well, there are 2 changes that the plan we think in the best form of the plan would enact. But before I go into sort of specifying the plan text, I just want to clarify the plan text in a vacuum is obviously the most objective standard here. And whatever I say right now is sort of it would obviously be trumped by any sort of the words in the plan. But there are sort of 2 things the plan could do. One is that the plan sort of establishes.
I didn't really ask genuinely. The Davis Ev, what Ev substantiates a drink argument?
I'm like trying to answer questions here, but okay. The Davis evidence sort of makes 2 claims. I know you're going to say that it's about international courts. We're going to have 2 answers to that. One is that we sort of do model to international courts. The Sharp evidence that we read sort of says that we not only model to domestic actors, but also internationally. The second answer to that is that sort of we don't even need to model to international courts. Davis says international courts are a possible actor that could solve those wars, not that we need to use international courts. Modeling domestically does solve sort of wars that could escalate.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, foreign judiciaries.
Okay, it is sent. 12 off case. Advantage 1, advantage 2.
Veronica, you sent the one in C from last round. You need to resend.
Oh, you're so right. Okay, just kidding. Resending that. Quarters. There we go. This is the right document. Okay, send. Okay. Just give me like a visual confirmation when everyone's got it. Are we good? Yes, cool. Substantial reform requires a wholesale approach that overall criminal justice and Morris 70 wholesale essential substantive reverse policies that affect the overall system. The AF changes start to target a single subset to strengthen the topic to nullify controversy, expand the scope of the topic, justifies decriminalizing, increasing enforcement, each law enforcement agency, magnitude forensic strategies. Next off, not specifying agent beyond the USFG ability. She exports to Congress, executive counterclaim competition. Let's see. Shift out of agent specific decides case arguments, first ground clash. Next off, sentencing is judgment rendered following a conviction of a crime. DOJ 16 if you want to send it to pretty be sensitive to defend and first violation. No current detainees have been convicted, so the app isn't sentencing. HRW 1841 is the one the churches around the chambers of these hearings in the courts out of the government military commission on the charts of the plague receiver reforms the hearings of miles from the US and second violation habeas petitions are civil, so the app is not criminal justice reform. Kim 17 forever what is it determined to habeas for the community determined the person in prison administration of the multiple habeas position and civil office and what cities the examine the extradition of the military in the court code. -1 limits adding military procedures definite attention practice below topic 2 ground military asset and military asset and ground court topic criminal links to the state council elections etc. and 3 predator precision criminal justice needs to be definitive or it leads reform. Next off an act is constitutionally delegated solely to Congress. United U.S. courts 15 the constitution with 3 separate branches of federal courts that will interpret the courts that is Congress executive and the app uses scope definitive and negative broad interpretation negative topic compromises who assume the vast and advantages not intrinsic to the topic have an agent politics as the debates is on the negative necessary to response to an app talk research and clash. And next off the National Governance Association from the United States federal government that state cooperation all federal initiatives including relevant criminal justice policies will be conditioned upon the United States enacting substantial criminal justice reform habeas corpus procedure by sentencing in the United States and state reform and state refusal to cooperate with the criminal justice force defense act. Mrs. Gardner 20 they federal government enforce ammunition cooperation with state police government because of conduit system personal implication of state refusal cooperation and the nullification of like national security federal force repeal the version manner what is policy abolition possible and state bargaining checks isolation solves international crises. Malware 17 no course of negation international consider world isolation retreat the trade under powering it. Sorry, pause this. My computer is getting a call. I just like turn on do not disturb because that's bad. Okay. Starting again at 5:52. Powering engagement in person of the U.S. disorder to officers and foreign policy responding practice of Russian funding the foreign policy legally battle of new federalism and Saul's nuclear war. Hendrickson 17 the U.S. administration for the Heartland Republic of the U.S. overall appreciation of investors who sent us liberal order regional powers and the U.S. rectors and nuclear states destroying the world from the U.S. hockey space of the U.S. Justice and coalition partners. And next off Biden will advance a massive climate agenda but just keep the extent of Congress action large budget laws to avert the climate crisis. Mary 17 climate policy like the Paris Agreement 2050 to truly the infrastructure of the home and coalition delivering bold line policy cut, the Carter policy and Manchin Hayes liberal cross-rated criminal justice reform like the plan forcing is no cost backlash. Brown 1-6 makes the bit of my heart sounding the matrix with the cover rest of the choosing belief around some for state deputy found belief about and overwhelming cause extinctions brat and 11-19 are the Sunday degree beyond the human story devastating whether Wesley to the ecosystem level core receipt over the rainforest the active non-five direction adequate water towards the condition to have human habitation of an inhabitable high likelihood civilization come to an end. And next off 34 states the United States work out to call a limited constitutional convention with the sole purpose amendment to the Constitution Act substantial criminal justice reform habeas corpus procedure but in sensing the United States 38 states in the United States of America ought to ratify said amendment and solves colon race 12 amendments and the Supreme Court will vote in favor of Van Buren now. Whitaker 1129. The Supreme Court the ideal for the Supreme Court the question of 50% more clearly hackers and security reason have an operating legal court of change the ambiguity in the security was this early 2021 and the plan trades off comrades 20 something then we have no indication that attempt to the case publicized the carefully records the Robert of the decided president and the merits of the Madison death and Lisa he is where our first calculate the Constitution and the court's maker and specifically Roberts is the key strength book Watcher 1130 the Constitution and the law from the cabinet was considered by property certain employees of the Roberts and the tip the reason of mental story with one person not understanding the evidence of the authorization the statute of the sound the priest of reviews and actually yeah, narrowing the CFA is key to encourage security risks to bolster cyber security. Johnson 20 instances of interpretation tooling for security, cybersecurity, future cybersecurity, the reasonable less tools that exploit interpreted analysis, and security in the long-term cut, the credit term, and otherwise cyber attacks cause extinction penalty Armstrong 15. Critical infrastructure small term external disruption highlighted in all favor of the transcender strongly coupled with the Australia custody cyber causes the trigger social secondary effects of the conflict of aviation grade other sovereign the opposite of the possibility of use of the trade property or climate change and next off the United States executive to prohibit fossil fuel production competes to both links the politics that benefit from impact curves above next off the superficial treats the tweets of criminal justice improves legitimacy and co-ops potential liberation cards on us 19 criminal workers of the subsidy to equal legitimacy over the names where there's a focus on the marks and the public reform the solution to jacket and understand the punishment or way scarcity and reject the reality of legal incorporation reform that prevents racial and trans violence the alternative established practice in liminal territory such as marine abolition Wahhabi 14 we need alternative personality recognition legal from hierarchical difference of the name of the cost racial severity of the prison industrial conflicts of the word with the marine abolition notice of the operation liminal terrorism established to abolish education skip the next off I'll go back to it at 5 times the Supreme Court of the United States should rule that non-acting criminal justice reform and habeas corpus procedure and sentencing in the United States would be unconstitutional. The advantage: no democracy impact, new tech, not actors, military autonomy, and rating institutional constraints to undermine democratic peace theory. Potter 16 court operations radio water with signing to discussion and selectivity using confident and not losing efforts and familiar impeachments or to never come to the detective the less less accountability institution practice in favor of the person be person to the institution or change or susceptible to mind which is therefore policy and the democratic system may begin to erode and global democracy resilient and inevitable toe 10. By the end of the century, globally, the Democrat is in no place in democracy can do this with the evolution 130 to the democratic evolution of the police human rights of this right democracy universal the globalization, spreading the technology that opportunity the developing culture on the later well-being for the democracy to any 40 more democratic all population will be norm and internally so don't substantiate global collapse of democracy. Miko says there's been a genuine concern courts would lose power, doesn't argue it reddish, doesn't establish a brink for backsliding or the status quo should have called the cause the impact and press power time now.
Veronica, that's on the other advantage.
No, it's not. Press power is high now. The Congress doesn't want to set a precedent. The 18 Republicans failed to prove that Trump didn't place in terrorists the Congress is to have invested the legislative president Congress has it under for the broader reluctance. Congress has it the executive authority surveillance powers and extinction executive flexibility key to respond to terror road states and pro-lift. 17 foreign affairs and regular regulation lift you demands with action and reconsider emergency Congress has for radical Chile system that they're not security take advantage when the operator track the Japanese flexibility possibility the speed of person and the president secrecy of the president or respond to terrorism regulation WMD pro-lift. And the next advantage caused by democracy stuff from above the rule of lawlessness to over it's about international courts on no evidence that no evidence that says substantiates that only domestic modeling spills over in courts shouldn't affect foreign affairs. Says their author Milko 12 the executive around foreign policy and other along the course of the judicial first determination for if it is not competent then making sensitivity for losing macro relation to the nation concerned with the executive probably with branches over the time to under constitution provision and determination of correction to human rights and the damage of 194 relations. It's attempts to reform recipient nations. And no, impact of populism and their evidence is hyperstrobic. 17, the representative of the author and the difference in the decline in Germany, the decline to the recent political shifts of the populace and the bodies that had the factors of your city and overdone markets seem to be stable. Numbers, obviously, Trump, democracy, and populism. Yeah, I don't have time to get to what I just said.
You good?
Yep.
Reasons to reject team?
I guess all the T violations is bad.
Cool. T and acts. Could you please list like, I don't know, 5 apps that you think beat ESR, 5 Congress apps?
The okay, sure.
Antitrust.
Hold on,
13th
wait.
Amendment app that
wait.
Woodward reads.
What's the 2AC answer to ESR for antitrust?
With antitrust,
The
like
Congress key warrant for funding.
So
13th
I can
Amendment
see
is
that in
actually
funding
kind
for
of
the executive.
okay. 13th Amendment is
I
actually
literally
kind
was
of fire
prepping your app
answers.
right
The
before this.
movements advantage that Woodward reads says the perception of the courts is not sufficient to be the counter, or is not sufficient to solve, since it can't like get movements behind that and get rid of all that violence of the carceral system.
A fiat funding for movements from the executive.
Fiat funding for movements, that's not like a thing.
That is.
I've never seen in my entire life a counterplan that fiated funding for movements and anything that said that a funding would sustain the movement.
So you
itself.
have the movements. Okay, whatever. I don't care.
That seems
This
kind of ridiculous.
TFAA
honestly.
thing. The Roberts swing card. Why is Roberts the swing vote? Because you have this card says Sotomayor, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh are sort of in favor of narrowing right now. Seems like you have 2 conservatives on board in addition to the 3 liberals. Means we already have 5 votes.
We think the Pomerantz evidence establishes this question better. It says, quote, Roberts appears to be quite careful in the decision to break ranks, which means that he would swing because the plan is obviously something that requires political capital and sways his decision.
No, it's not that Roberts would swing. My question is, why do we need Roberts votes for the CFAA? Because we already have Gorsuch and Kavanaugh according to your second piece of evidence. So we have 3 liberals and then we have 2 conservatives on board. So why isn't that 5-4?
We think that those aren't certain, and we also think that Roberts' vote is probably
Your evidence says Kavanaugh expressed concerns about privacy. Like, it seems like both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are pretty highly likely to vote for the CFAA already.
I don't think so. The Johnson evidence establishes how it's sort of uncertain now, and Roberts would be the swing vote. Also, the Pomerantz evidence also establishes this question, talks about how it matters to him and how he'd swing based on PC and perception.
Okay, cool. The T sentencing violation, I guess, why do you think this applies to sentencing reform? I guess sentencing is a punishment. Why isn't habeas a reform of that punishment, i.e. allowing prisoners to challenge wrong sentences?
I guess we would disagree on what it means to reform a sentence. Obviously, like maintaining the sentence is probably not topical. We think that changing what the sentence is would be topical, but that's not what the app does. This exists on 2 levels. The first is the HRW violation, that detainees haven't been convicted. So the app doesn't really do anything because it's at the trial level. And then the second is the Kim evidence, which establishes that habeas petitions are civil, which means that you definitely don't meet T sentencing. Otherwise, it's probably limits explosion, just like civil apps aren't topical.
Okay, cool. We'll take prep. Okay, stop prep. That was 132 taken.
Wait, is it 10 minutes of prep? I thought it was 8.
Oh, my bad, my bad.
All right, this is going to be a big order. The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, ace spec, T enact, T subsets, T sentencing, the critique, the NGA counterplan, the Kong counterplan, the fossil fuel counterplan, the court politics dissad, and then the Biden politics dissad. Oh yeah, court counterplan. Court counterplan can be before fossil fuel. Oh yeah, actually, could we take a second of prep? It's conditional, right? Great. That was 2 seconds taken. Great. Is anyone not ready, by the way? Please verbally let me know. Great. Advantage 1, expanding habeas to incorporate instant greater right to remain judicial and receiving recurring court finality over the branches. That's Milko. Reference is group. The first two are yes, democracy impact and not resilient. Thereof doesn't assume erosion of institution and populace coming out, which is key to democratic signaling to stop autocrats from touting muscularity. Interlinks are fantastic. Milko says habeas is outlined in the Constitution, key to constitutionalism. Also says counter-majoritarian nature of the court solves proposed changes by a constitutional Congress that destroys democracy. Separation of powers, non-unique and unchecked executive causes a congressional overreaction down the line. That's slow. The plan permits exercise of presidential authority, but only if legally both for that combats groupthink and fosters deliberative culture that stops global escalation and conflict, creation of conflicts, reading use of voter, creating torture members that cause millions like me to suffer, reject them on ethics, executive speed, and secrecy are wrong. That's 18 and efficient coordinated presidency and necessary relationship is neither related are classic challenges appetitive for any president to bureaucracy, limited deep limited as a world of the sheer number of agencies, stakeholder policy, and individuals, transfers, expertise, and action, slow, uncertain, and misunderstood. Separation of powers is good. Deliberation, comments by for sounder policy formation. That's Adler and Sloan facts. That's UCS 817. First, you can use the U.S. custody active where the power belongs to Congress alone. In addition, could be made rationally and impulsively should not be left up to any single individual. Unchecked executive discretion causes global nuclear war. That's above. Advantage to the plan cements global defense by ensuring court finality, primacy of court over habeas or executive refusal. That's strive rule of law, or international education, solves conflicts and foreign judiciaries independently. So, yes, Malling. Sharp says jurist training, jurist dialogues, etc. All causes. That's from jurist studies, etc., which is most sound. Milko about HR, not the their evidence of Milko about HR, not the plan. Plan solved by foreign judiciaries working domestically and modeling to international courts. Yes, populism impact escalates because they want to tout muscularity. Prefer Sakharov that says the wave is coming out. Thumpers are after Venus. Trump is out of office. Institutions are key. Institutions are key, not the people. A-spec. We specify US if you want anything else for aggressive arbitrary non-resolution on Rex fairness, by regressing the judge spec 2, Rex education and class, invert to the increased set of substantive issues. 3, you should ask which branch your fault for giving us vague questions. DNAC. We meet one operationally planned vacuum says FG2 contextually fair courts and Naxi and habeas. That's Murphy counter to include source. That's right preferred. One field context right says it's trend of fair cases, not opinions. Second for resolutional context. The resolution says enact CGR enact law, not reform, which is more inclusive. Prefer our evidence, which says they can. Anything else is unpredictable. That's Northwestern 1921. Free over limiting arbitrarily excludes core controversy over equal protection, privacy, and search theory. That's central to limit functional limits like abolition states. ESR corners of literature 4 neg ground. They lose on court. And comments are a higher quality. ACP put attention to the court. No. Congress has been election over 5 after election. The court speed the state of Cameron. OP 6 reasonability for substance crowd 7. Skip that C subsets. We meet one plan in a vacuum. That was over 2 precedentially. Court ruling encompasses all subsets. Morris votes after request more 78 without substantially ambiguous. Includes subsets that's so American 70 substantial includes single component. Is substantially important. All degree. The term is ambiguous and pretty important. In unambiguously means within. That's column 52. We not find the ambiguity of it according to ordinary meaning in meaning within the limits. Well, obviously not the route because that would be no point of the requirement. Prefer one Afghan excluding subsets. Make picks and people 2 logic and reform affects the system function limits and limit-based checks reasonability avoid subset crowd T sentencing. We meet one plan text in a vacuum. Sentencing reform means alteration to elect. That's SO18. How long offender mean incarcerated dimensions of CGR in particular sentencing is a process, not an event that stops at all. Sentencing is a process in which people find either have sentences imposed upon them. First violation is not us. We're not GIPO. We need the second violation. First, we only reform criminal habeas. That's no criminal defendants have habeas corpus. Second, criminal justice reform includes all stages of the legal process. That's SO18. Criminal justice procedural reporting, investigating, prosecution, trial, court, and corrections, reforms for all stages of the legal process. No Brightland habeas could be policing or forensic science. Their burden preferred. One logic reform to sentence meet in sentencing. Second, predictability for absolute evidence, functional limits, limit-based reasonability, cross-apply it all. Okay. One framework way consequences of implementing the plan against those that are terminated solves the case. Restarts the ban the treaty where unfairly excuse the act, includes the intrinsic or indefinite reciprocal clash. Also, all takes place of the actor. Key to clash and fairness. Utopian fiat is a very not because they against a specific action agent. Key to clash and fairness. All clash and fairness. For floating picture of moving cases, clash evasion. 3 extinction outweighs. That's burn 17. It is good for people. It is at least for people with disabilities without people. That's very receiving values. These lives and things taking life by permission. So disrespecting for their people without their interest on breaking how it could be to hear psychological sensitive projects. 5 perm do both. The plan reduces the number of people in prison. 6 the alternative is bad. Let's advantage tries to throw in the capital. Do more harm. 7 doesn't solve the app because it doesn't use court practice for citations. NGA counterpoint. First, perm do both looks like following. Changes the political nature of the plan because the states can cry. Second, conditionalities voting issue causes strategy, which decks fairness of the last time constructed and rest education because it's not real world. 3, perm the counter plan. 4, Universal 58 is a voting issue. Distorts topic literature, robs West Afghan, and discourages variance in class, feeling non-uniformity. Solves their offense. 5, the court's immune to political responses. That's Mazone 18. The court does not offend Congress for their invest capital and members not to appropriate constitutional. The court has little to fear after election cards. Something the Supreme Court, even the most modern field to advance the court. It was about politics. 2017 just rulings are immune to political responses. 6 doesn't solve the app. It's about Supreme Court authority. Can't make Supreme Court look component and irrelevant and can't check the executive and don't signal because they're just states. 8 federal keys. States just a majoritarian because they're elected. 9 doesn't solve internationally. States don't go international. 10 Trump's out of office. Biden is an isolationist. 11 doesn't solve judicial independence because modeling is a precedent. 12 links to net benefit. Multiple courts increase perception of activism. And Republican states attack policy because they will become more isolationist, which because they're the majority. Most states are Republican. Concon. First, perm do both. Second, perm to the counterpoint. Third, doesn't solve court power. Advantages actors to the counterpoint because the Supreme Court looking perm because the court functionally overruled by state legislative mechanism. 4, doesn't solve judicial independence. The Constitutional Amendment already exists but fall to precedent. That's actually an active court and motivate litigants. 5, limited concons for artificially fast solves the evidence. In an effort to artificially create perfect legal mechanisms, not limited concons. Solves are often to give the app a fighting chance. 6, perm to the plan with when the amendment is ratified. Shields time from links. 7, perm to the plan through a concon. 8, links to that benefit. It can't solve concons leads to litigation and lawsuits be ambiguity. Go back to NGA. Perm do the plan and the NGA process in another area. Perm do the plan and the process in another area. Court counterplan. Permutation to the counterplan. If we win TNAC, it proves that we can be them. Perm do both. There's no net benefit, not mutually exclusive. Yeah. Fossil fuel counterplan. 1, perm do both, not mutually exclusive. 2, perm to the counterplan must be by text and function. 3, links to net benefit. It's still criminalization. 4, executive action fails because it doesn't. It can't enforce things without laws. Okay, we'll do court politics. No more swing. Decides 6-3 majority. That's Greenhouse 11-5. The Supreme Court now has a conservative majority. 6-3 majority. Over 20 pending cases. All listed in the link. He can flip on any no link. 1, deliberations occur secretly. 2, life in a room incentive for vote switching. 3, non-falsifiable. Can't prove a negative swing theories. Wrong. Statistically proved by Roberts. The plan boosts Roberts' credibility. First, court power restores the judiciary. The final arbiter law. Supreme Court silence. Looks like punting question. 2, procedural fairness is key to legitimacy. Proved by recent court decision. Af picks the voting ballots. Either than I know counter beats and robs all Afghan. We failed. All conservatives vote for the plan. The Bannister v. Davis ruling thumps this because it's the 2020 liberal habeas case that was decided and Roberts swung on. Private sector thumbs. That's Civione and CBN Civilia 18. Failures include underestimate companies' lack of efficient information sharing, absence of product liability for software and hardware solutions. States are engaged in private sector regulation. No impact because, next, dissent. COVID comes first and no concrete bill exists as reconciliation makes passes inevitable regardless. That's joining Kelly 127 Downs are eyeing reconciliation for COVID, but climate might have to wait for round 2 humor. Says Senate votes to increase pastor relief for voter reservations. Rolling already starts reservations as any of the impeachment trial could climate infrastructure to a second round of reconciliation on the table. There'd be no reason Democrats not getting on with their majority even if they can't Republicans so support. Democrats will be pushing infrastructure in the coming months, but 93% of our attention is on COVID relief, and then the remaining ban for the armies double ban. Either Congress wants to pass it or it overrules the link, or they don't. Just not need courts to meet political responses. That was above fiat solves the link. It abhors backlash. The plans announced in June, proven empirically with cases not intrinsic. A logical policymaker could do the plan and pass the climate bill. Vote no. Debate or the plan. Thoughts to this ad. The climate bill isn't enough because international countries, China and Russia, and India engage in international missions. No modeling claim, so it's not full dis ad. Anything else?
We can get to this card here. Go.
Okay, perm do both as brown shops. If any cross society committing unification for procedural justice, consider efficacy of legal strategies to your non-enforcement or prevent additional harms to women, color, queer, trans people. Focus on law, or the correct law.
That was on the abolition.
That was on abolition.
Was there another card on the agenda dissad that you didn't send out?
Yeah, you didn't send out the 2AC on the agenda just then.
I thought it was sent out.
The uniqueness card was all the
Okay,
only new
cool,
card.
got it.
Okay, so everything's in the doc.
Yeah, except for uniqueness for agenda and the perm card that's being sent right now.
Give me a second. I'm just gonna get my computer charger. Cool. You good?
Yep.
Key enact. The Northwestern evidence, where does it define the word enact? It just speaks about it in context, in like
Yeah,
a contextual.
but in general, that's the 1AC evidence. In general, enact doesn't have a definition. For enact law, it would be an entirely different question than for enact reform, which is what your evidence is about. Your evidence is about enacting law, which is a separate question.
Okay, I understand the utility of the evidence. I'm sort of questioning where it defines the word. I guess it's just using it like speaking in the context of other things. Where does it define the word enact? Like
Enact does not have a technical meaning. It is used as a synonym for declare. If the definition has said legislation is enacting law, it's probably a different question we presented.
Sure, that's fine.
Enact is
The Huck evidence on the NGA counter plan. Where does this evidence conclude that like federalism causes a one-party state? That sounds kind of bold.
the one-party state evidence, the Huck and
Yeah.
Grin evidence. I didn't read that.
Yeah. Oh, my bad. Okay, just kidding. The permutation. What does that look like on NGA?
Which one?
The first one, perm do both.
Which one? Permutation do both. It would look like follow-on because it changes the political nature of what's happening.
What does that mean?
Well, it looks like the states and the NGA enacted it first, which looks like there's a follow-on by.
Okay,
You.
that's fine. The the We Meet card on T sentencing that the plan reviews sentences. Why is reviewing a sentence predictable?
Because it's in sentencing, which is reform in sentencing, not just generic in
What does it mean to review?
review it. Which card are you talking about?
The Ironside evidence.
I did not read that card either.
Just kidding. Okay. The first card you read though, right?
The first card I did not read. I read Plain Text in a Vacuum, and then I read the Estelle and Stobbs evidence.
Okay, that's fine. The Stobbs evidence.
Mhm.
The process of which people who have been found guilty of offending against a criminal law have sanctions imposed on them. I guess like having sanctions imposed on them, how does that make it a process? Because this evidence says that the process by which people have found guilty, and then further goes on to define it as like the sanctions being imposed on them. I guess like where does the word process modify
The
like
process
sentencing in the way
modifies
that you're
it because it's
using
not
it?
at one moment. The process modifies it because it's not at one moment. It includes post corrections to the sanctions.
But it says having sanctions imposed on them, which is probably
Right.
an event.
Process.
The word process, like the word process is in the definition, but it doesn't say sentencing is a process.
Well, sentencing is the process. It defines it. I'm not sure what you're.
Okay. Recent trajectory.
There's a lot. 50 state fiat, conditionality, utopian fiat, alt near alt text. Let me just go through this. Floating picks. Limited concon.
Okay, unless wait, are there more? Or-
Yeah, that should be it.
Okay, unless Veronica needs prep. Veronica, no. Okay, it's
I'm gonna go to the bathroom while we get the card doc. Be right back.
okay. It's T enact the judicial or names. I think it's court power first, then judicial. Wherever the democracy impact is first, then the other one that's also the democracy impact but called something else, and then MGA. Okay. Did everyone get it? Everyone have it up? Someone stop me if they're not good. Okay.
We're getting the flows up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. First target is plain text in a vacuum. You don't need to value cross against one is here for a combination vacuum is impact also to our strategy. From two every proportion includes any app with topic word limits or limits off with district combination terms. Purpose strategy. You can also put negative assumptions since they have no evidence that would actually solve lives if it's go through Congress. The next argument is there's the evidence. I'll answer that below. The next argument, the contextual definitions of the counter police and against Congress. US, that was U.S. courts versus limits constitutional interpretation and nature courts 13 how U.S. corporate state of intimidation logic is a hard look review difference. And then it was against a drill on deconvenience. It's advantage like a reverse court clock under the presence observer fact international perception. Court power independence which are not in the top glance field with respect to distance. So courts on the neg are better. That undermines the quality prep. Which says the negative makes this worse. Economic based courts a new law based law expert. And this is also two tests using a law graded by understand the situation by conservative case like legislator next law by mother courts law which change the court. Two is crown. Courts says are dead with 60 majority and tissues and just in charge of Asian process and politics are cross based but courts are insulated because they're not elected or legislative party. That three is predictable. Every author having Google their shares which filter back to private documents. The U.S. courts say government sourcing text of the Constitution and act means to pass in the world which becomes an act of law. Chelsea the 18th enacted laws on litigation. What about suppose every laws get a deliberate body in favor of governs future events. Court of Painter has declared the government there will occur. Congress enacts to delegate the authority to courts to promulgate procedural rules. Consider 19 ruling as limiting of the judiciary to promulgate rules. Courts define Congress and functions as on the side. The next argument is right is a jaded candidate not description general right court rules not criminal statutes which is the intent of laws for inter-reality and bar admission and immigration which are solely courts and not quasi legislative context of criminal justice. The Murphy evidence says those recorded active rules which are codified by Congress which is intended above laws for evidence, but they also did not extend any other of the 1AC cards, so I don't need to answer them. And if they go for that in the 2 area, in the 1 area, I was getting answers. The different question 1921 evidence and act specific to law failure. 19 act incorporates a about law common defense.com and divides an act to make it so a statute and no condition to find act to make law pass as to make a statute to find act make it to a law ownership ability and act when which comes out of the United States illegal technical understanding upon the minister violation of constitutional evidence through Congress. Big fourth and make law Congress the evidence is written by a law review editor. Legal norms have changed since 1921. Writing about common law, not criminal statutes, which end of laws for in a specific court case which is not intended to find and goes back into the reality. And here's the court case it's citing, which is because it has a distinct legislative choice power. People who are off 1911 legislative power seeks to constitutional evidence and assembly but enact law or declare laws and power to enact public regulation such judicial power. The overloading can be good if officers take innovation or careers. The alternative is zero clash and seem to ignore every innovation for stillness because of Congress strategy. The topic is massive. Regardless, NBA reached petty offense, Ushford readies, Homeland Security, categories, corporate crime, color means CIA, Lasso reads, DNA, and radio southern algorithmic transparency. They see underground gut check. There's no functional limits. You have some controversy, how predictable seems. Can't prevent abolition. Lucio politics don't link to courts. That was above courses that's stuck in our predictable. That's about states. There's a happening season to develop like key ESR states to lose part to the kind of one under their definition. Not 2 A's cuts where we have to avoid them. Hypertrophic, create database, and a short topic research. Also, Murphy is court definition because it's not contextual. Does not have intent to define. They say negative ground. Yes, there's Congress funding. No, they see Flex. Yes, Congress state, but they say in private modeling movements, doctrines or 2AC can read agents as reasonably prefer committing interest. One judge's question reasonably it's comparatively suggested arbitrary when to reject the QT is substance for reading differences may be explored to legal context and what about legislative process. They're defining the topic for a year. And when's what debate? Democracy. There's all causes of democracy like the capital right, HR interventions, the which they cannot solve for a period of process and foreign interventions. I think it's of all those examples that need to use overwhelms the language or it proves that democracy is Sicilian. So there's something uniquely, if they see the Milko, it's specific that those uniqueness. Milko is from 2012 and they have no evidence that it's even getting worse than the status quo. There's no Brink argument and there's a lack of uniqueness card better than what it sees. So that's definitely different to establish a concrete internal. Like there's no for erosion now, and the turn will be in the 1 and R. That's all stuff. On the other page are thumbers aren't uniqueness because they don't have a Brink argument, and their evidence only says that some agree with this, and then they don't actually substantiate that it would cause a global collapse of democracy. So there's a missing internal link. Global democracy is resilient. And that's how the century global a place to work out to start after Africa, Asia, and then the Middle East of 100 countries that work in Africa. Our general human rights universally linked to globalization instead of technology, press, opportunity for developing countries thinking of believe in wealthy prerequisite of democracy 2040 population. The other advantage, all this stuff applies. All the other stuff applies because the interlink relies on the rule of law and constitutionalism and stuff like that. Which is so if we solve that interlink and prove it's democracy, and then proves it's resilient, then they cannot access any of the population. But there's no impact regardless because they're like not trained, have no stuff. Capital right, obviously thumbs and Trump thumbs. He's out of office. Biden takes over and GA. The Canada tells 100 the conditioning enforcement on FCGR on the plan for the federal government to acquiescence or else enforcement notification. Historical precedent proves this in factor strategy. First, and liberal government property with fails when there must be a break by the states to refuse the Fed to create one of the future uncooperative rules. 2, the perm creates rules of conflict which verifies the benefits of bargaining. Leonard said, technically free speech, or let's refer to history, shows recognize the value of fiction and for jarring contrast working together. The version of dialogue, clarifies the encourages participation, no conflict reverse, ongoing conflict, sparking benefit of resistance, but states really little remains the market have the choices. The follow-on is intrinsic because as the owner time that's what issue because ruin any possible given benefit force the negative artificial competition per counterplan covers the athletes of issue because it makes the athlete moving trigger and plus negate the counterplan can be by tax function and only mandates the states, not the federal community states. OED 89 protects the ability to states resolved. LA House 5 legislative resolved means certain Oxford 20 determined the USC spectrum OED 89 literally the states should summer 74 the construction is one of the job means when the laws and villages, but as opposed to in the future, the enact stuff was in the enact stuff was above they say that it cannot solve. Yes, it does because they say fiat. Sorry, they say fiat we need because this doesn't fiat 50 seats, but just one organization, the NGA counter. We get to we have non-double vouchers introduced to the plan. Let me say we get generic say no arguments that have politics anyways and heresy arguments. Kind of what's good. One negative target, three a massive destroying topic. No DAs or solid functional mistrusting federal actions. Key two logic when you create is legitimate equals artificially it takes insulates them from testing. The next argument is courts are incident versus that empirics is proven. Justice Roberts proved that there will be swing justice that's premised on those political men. Second is that the second is I did not copy this in. Okay, I'll come back to that. The next argument is that it doesn't solve the advantages. Yes, it does because it still has the federal government or the courts do the plan, but it's all the courts do the plan, which would shape out the advantages, but there's no precursors or any impact to that. In the 2AC, they see group the Trump stuff and the Republicans are isolationists. They have no evidence to substantiate this, and the states wouldn't go against it. The states wouldn't go against it regardless because they have all the power, and then would force the federal government to do this. And they say limited benefit. We're not going for an external benefit. The intrinsic permutation is bad because you have an infinite impermissible benefit. If you have add-ons, so this has a question of theory from the capital legit. You should check the permutation. It doesn't. Also, it's not textually or functionally. It's textually and functionally intrinsic because it does all future criminal justice policies that are on the counterplan or the plan text, and textually because they don't have a counterplan, they don't have a permutation text, so there's no means by which when they make this a complete argument will answer in the 2 hour. Let me just. Okay. I will send these out. It has massive historical precedent, and the fiscal and political cost of saying no forces the GOP to give European something federalism as a powerful weapon against the United States. People find immigration, drug laws, healthcare, create opportunity for corporate federalism. The state level influence possible for participation in the trade, also depending opportunity costs versus the PC. And federal employing Republicans will be forced to compromise with them play political and fiscal price. I'll send this card out for process. Okay.
We'll let you know when you get it.
I did not get it yet.
Sorry, what's that?
We'll let you know when we get it.
Just got it.
Okay, we just got it. Open for cross-ex. Yep. Open for cross-ex. Yep. Great.
I'm good.
Okay. TNAC, the Statsky evidence concedes TNAC means to quote pass or adopt a rule. The Rosenberg evidence says court can do that. So then why can't that be through a court rule instead of law?
Creating a rule is not enacting law. In the context of the resolution, we think that's a better predictable definition. Since all of your definitions are in the context of a Supreme Court citing a case, while that might be more predictable in the context of that specific case, in the context of debate, they're all just citing dictionary definitions. So judges don't like define words themselves. They don't think about what they mean. They cite definitions for what makes sense in the context.
I'm kind of confused. You're saying it's more specific to enact law. I'm not sure if you know this. The resolution isn't enact law. It's enact criminal.
Yeah, enact means law. That's the
reform.
Philo card, I believe the author is. Revised literature goes through like a ton of dictionary definitions, determines its most predictable. Anything else seeks to inject like technical understanding, which is obviously not predictable because teams like know what the word means and then prepare around that word.
The Philo evidence?
Yeah.
It says that enact can be of a statute. Why is it always of a statute?
It says enact incorporates effective and binding law. And then it goes dictionary.com, New Oxford American Dictionary, Random House, Webster's, goes through all of those, determines it's most predictable. And it's most predictable for like everyone because it is how everyone defines it.
When have the states ever forced the Supreme Court to act?
The Supreme Court to act, we think it's still sufficient because the political costs of saying no outweigh, which forces them to acquiescence.
When has it ever happened empirically, and why would they be forced
with
when they're
the courts? I don't think the counterplans really ever happened with the courts. but that doesn't mean it
Has
doesn't
happened in
work.
the past. Why would it happen? Why would it solve in the future in regards to the court?
Why would it solve? Well, it's never happened in the past, so there's no example that would go against it, but that at least proves that the fiated counter plan or whatever would force the federal government to say yes. We've been arguing about the political costs of saying no, because that it's okay.
It's the political costs arguments are about Congress and the federal government enacting policy.
It still has to do with the political parties and why, like, Republican Supreme Court justices would also have an incentive to say yes and then do those things with how they.
Kind of weird. All right, your evidence also isolates
a little
marijuana
weird, but it's
as an
fine.
area. Why hasn't that caused the same sort of effects that you say necessary and spill over?
Wait, sorry, say that again.
Your evidence isolates marijuana as an area. Why hasn't that spilled over or caused the same effects you talk about?
The federal government has never said yes to marijuana because it was not where they put literally everything on the line with regards to marijuana policy. The federal government has not like decriminalized marijuana or whatever, which is why we're seeing like states refuse, but then the federal government has not been following through with that, which proves it's not the mechanism of the
That's
counter
fine.
plan.
On case, the Tau evidence earlier than our evidence and just says that democracy will spread. Where does it say it's resilient?
It still says that it has a big enough reach, like in Africa, Asia, Middle East, all those examples. There's been a democratic evolution, means it's going to be tougher to collapse globally, especially if like just stuff in the U.S. happens and there's 130 states. If like bad stuff happens to America, you have no modeling card in the 1AC.
I would disagree with that. All right,
I would agree with
that's
that.
fine.
I'm attaching it right now. Cool. Let me know when everyone's good for an order. It's kind of big.
We're good for an order.
Cool. It is the abolition K. The
Actually, really quickly, can we take like a second of prep? Veronica, you know you're taking Conde, right?
Yep.
If
got
not,
it.
okay. And prep, we have 7:55.
Cool. Abolition K. Con counter plan. Courts disad. It's not disad. Counter plan. Court disad. Agenda politics. Warming counter plan. And then the first advantage is executive flex.
Can we get that one more time?
Yeah. Abolition. Con. Courts. Court disad. Agenda politics. Warming counter plan. Executive flexibility on the first advantage. Hold on. I'm gonna take a second to clarify something. 7:55 zoning. Okay, 7:44 left. Oh, my bad. Didn't realize I was muted. That was 7:44 left. Does anyone need the order again? Cool. The abolition K can see the perm test competition. We are in a floating pig, which means there's no link to theory, but you can cross by standards from condo, and it's a reason to reject the argument of team con same thing. Perm test can see the perm test competition theory is a reason to reject the argument of team courts. Counterplan can see the perm test competition just previous competition for to enact the court decide concede and pass anyway. So there's no and can see there's no cyber tax the agenda politics can see that the court, so there's no list, so there's no link. The warning counterplan can see the perm test competition counterpretation. We get what we did. Condo was good one invasion debaters researchers having followed by strategy allows renewed arguments key to year-long education to neglect acts against the fixes focus debates. We need operated option to compensate for rationing grants. We need for processing multiple options for to see if it's best answers to focus the debating decreases. Critical thing for idea place only way to eradicating the counterpoint same around alternatives to communities isn't just a referee don't send north to debate all year, but if we didn't do anything uniquely, bad don't vote us down. Executive flex. This the case right now Ways and Terms case press power strong, not pressure for any tempers that they have an example where the executive 100% concluded to Congress as well. All their examples just Congress speaking up, but nothing that mirrors a durable field of the plan. Broader executive discretion is key to solving existential risks of terror and terror drugs. Say something you evidence. See, first argument, the non-unique no executive authority remains unfettered burdens. 1111. Trump executive order served the court for release of the power administration making sure to change the presidency while to relation between the executive and the courts for relief. No constraints upon precaution. 20 Congress and for the beaches and become the large issues on like the acquisition on the hands and third supplies many times so I ran up over a pretty low button military force responsibility. Their cards were terrible and don't assume the power transition and courts have no incentive to constrain the executive. Flatic 20 courts have the result where powers the lower courts follow the justice of the doctrine not parts of the wrong place and the wrong kind of really premature in recent days where the courts reversed and article 2 conservatism is high courts favor the executive rule. 17 article 2 conservative life of the even in the Thomas of December the difference is a little outside the courts here so thing I'm going to adjust it to underscore communities of robust executive authority. They say the group think argument. No, it's inevitable. Brooks 18 not as many able to consent to the decision making word of the guarantee why solution of each would be made or not group thing I read with the hundreds that expert give support and it's empirically disproven extensive and it's empirically disproven extensive checks. Yeah, Mr. 20. The evidence of the people were helpless exist and the homogeneous no objective evidence by this week with the we're not used directed over every mission of this piece of reality beyond American center from Middle East Gulf War. Now Afghanistan, I Russian other issues. They say the Sloan evidence. No, it's wrong. Not about Trump. Fake lines suggest restrictions, but all our recent evidence accounts for those incentives and no institutional will for checks. Absent the aft dresser. 20. Trump is related to something that the base authority for relation of confidence damage and the will capacity to the ability the ability to Congress Supreme Court decided which trying to proofs that we can demonstrate zero difference that Trump to enforce something to resolve dispute at PO. You know the rulings are the course to refrain from controlling the president and leadership is high. Every metric shall favor the U.S. Said 20. America would ever take the policy invasion of that it was the president the raw measures the economic and the financial powers remain to allow for the was defending one of that is significantly lower China China's 14.3 million American share the world economy accounted for 23.9% of the China's economy that is since 2007 after every show 50% world household income setting relatively based on for tech never run the US of the economy the low innovation of fishes to the day shoot the depend on the higher quality manufacturing line the US company the dollar currency shows 35% of the national payment the best of the US church the Chinese money the Wall Street the Chinese 40% of the world software the value of the research composing of issues in the first and the 80s and the never spin with all those was an active and was going to be related to the US and the Chinese internal challenges just Max America is here to say they say for reject you one this wasn't a reason to reject the argument. No reason to reject him. So where's reject the argument? Two, they have to answer the words of the evidence. There's no reason why you being a bad person doesn't dispute the warrants in the actual card. Rhetoric is irrelevant. Actual Trump policy is solidified leadership. Wayne and Stevens 20. Trump's rhetoric materially rebalanced to the question of the word of Washington from the achievement of the North to the South states. States were relatively able to security guarantees and engagement of the change China as the greatest said they say miscalc. No, there's no hair trigger forces or posture less aggressively safeguards. Elongate the decision process and advisory revolts. Two, there's no spoofing or mystery. So the systems are great at determining real threats and redundancy solved, and no impact missiles are pointing to the ocean. Takes too long to engage a meaningful number of weapons. That's CU evidence. I'll read another card.
Wait, Veronica.
Yeah.
On NGA, I think I didn't extend the net benefit. Just do that.
Okay. I'll read this card. Okay, I guess NGA impact net benefit is for an isolation. States encourage cooperation over policies. That's good because it signals to other countries that we're unified. I guess solves isolationism and alliances. That's good. Prevents nuclear war. Their evidence about did you answer their whatever. Their evidence about federalism being bad for it doesn't assume uncooperative federalism, but I don't think they got to a word in that card where they could have before or didn't read it. So yeah, cool.
626. Stop prep. 4 minutes taken. You have 2:26 left. I'm setting out cards right.
Court power, judicial independence, T and act. Wherever you float condo, I floated on the NGA counterplan, but apparently it was answered on fossil fuels. So wherever that is, and then the counterplan.
Could you do that one more time?
Court power, judicial independence, T and act, fossil fuels, NGA. Okay, is anyone not good? Perfect. Plan transfer finality by sort of having by clearly demonstrating authority between the executive and Congress, which solves groupthink and great power. The all causes democracy making no sense because our advantage is about signal, and two, the constitutionalism argument was dropped. The Reddish and Hines evidence sort of says that habeas is the and court power is the core of bedrock of democracy, so it overcomes all of these all causes. The Milko evidence, we don't need a brink because we every second we increase the probability, especially because they have no arguments about why sort of democracy has been solved since then, or the thumpers don't make any sense because they don't account for their newer evidence, like the Isaac Harrop evidence on the second advantage. This talks about increases in nationalism that are also challenging democracy resilient. No, the Reddish and Hines evidence is from 2016. Their evidence is from 2010 doesn't account for sort of new threats to democracy. The U evidence proper, the blocks didn't come to conclusions that restrictions on the executive are inevitable because we have better evidence that says that they will be sort of reactionary, heavy-handed in congressional statutes, which kills flexibility. The Sloan evidence says that proponents of executive don't like the sort of state of affairs right now, but the plan strikes a balance because it permits sort of executive discretion, but only makes it reviewable by the court. The framing issue for this debate, there are two sort of frames on the uniqueness debate. One is that all of their evidence is about Congress proper, while our evidence is sort of about the court making the executive justiciable. Two is that their evidence is about Trump, but obviously that doesn't apply right now. The next for the link debate, there's sort of their framing issue here is that we increase executive flexibility. We have we're going for a link turn here because we sort of stop the executive from being questioned because sort of court legitimacy imbues the executive with sort of the ability to make it look justiciable and the ability of Congress to be the ability of the court to stop congressional statutes. But an unchecked executive completely is bad. They have dropped the sort of evidence that says executive rebuilding solves global war and miscal culture groupthink among cabinets, rallying on the fly effect outweighs speed because we overcorrect by resorting to nuclear grabbing. Unchecked executive unstable. For 18. What kind of just running against this very pancake for remains I also I can say so you know this is self question whether sustainable North Carolina sustainable go to topicality and act. We meet plan in vacuum says or sorry, the second advantage, judicial independence. The plan solves populism by sort of by modeling globally. The sharp evidence was dropped on the modeling claim. Rule of law is not resilient. That was answered on the other page. They read a bunch of assertions at the bottom. Don't reward those, but Trump does not thump because that's AF uniqueness, topicality and act. We meet plan vacuums is actually not judiciary and act. CJR 1AS evidence is course where possible action rather than the plan vacuum is only coherent heuristic, not vague because uses the resolution made actor. Anything else is one arbitrary, two unverifiable, and three makes his burdens. Don't vote on presumption because I clearly said want to see cross-ex sort of questioning sentences means that Congress saves 1 or 2 lives, which is better than 0. Counter interpretation include courts not if facts or accuracy. Right has the intent to define sites. Field context shown in decisions in 3 federal districts, including Thompson versus Bell, which postdates so all their evidence prefer trends over theoretical applications because all their sort of common law definitions don't account for what's actually used in the courts. Top level framing issue for this debate is that the burden of the affirmative on topicality is just to prove that it's possible for the courts to enact reform, not that they often do it or even have done it in the past. JD Canada is sufficient quals. Right is in a peer-reviewed named journal, fact-checked by law professors, and cites decisions. Right says rules are laws and cites Black's law specifically. It does not follow the other way. Textualism is controversial, so enactment is not the resolution. Res context mod negative issues about enacting law, not criminal justice reform. Phillips says court sort of enacts CJR. Tyler says justice, Marxist reform. These were all extended in the 2AC. Right defines plain meaning. Just CSS court enact habeas. Frames predictability debate and means the NEG has not sort of met the burden of proof because they define law, not reform. Northwestern says that a distinction matters. We read tons of definitions at the bottom of the ONC. All say enacting reform can include courts. Yes, those were extended. They including the only U.S. government definition published, which answers their sort of admin office definition on the other page. They overlimit Fourth Amendment central policing, 13th, 14th century sentencing. Underlimiting does not always seems to be exclude agencies. Excluding core apps. Zero's topic education. They have net ground. They don't use elections or agenda DAs. That flexibility. Congress only takes sales too far. They have sort of dropped that ESR solves literally every version of every Congress have. But judges are also willing to hear cheating versions of the state's counterplan on this topic. Reasonability, evaluating sufficient defense instead of needing offense is not subjecting convenient interpretations shift the goalpost too far. Probably don't have time for conditionality. NGA counterplan, permutation to the plan, and do uncooperative federalism on other issues. This is sort of a function. I've inserted the text here. This is a functionally intrinsic perm, but textually legitimate. So it includes all of the text in the plan with no extra words. The word in the counterplan. So the counterplan is not textually competitive. We both agree textual and functional competition is good. Functional alone justifies counterplans. I think right now you can consolidate steal apps, which are unfair. It also solves the internal amendment because there's no evidence specific to habeas. Case solves and outweighs the internal amendment. Court where it's modeled drop populism serum means no uniqueness for the sort of counterplan impact. Independently, the counterplan does not solve the F. Ace of point is court power. You need sort of a strong judiciary, which cannot be has empirically never been forced by the states. B of point is judicial independence. Only SCOTUS precedent is what is modeled internationally. That's the sharp evidence. There also does not solve the internal net benefit. They have sort of dropped the GOP indict. The only card read by at the bottom of the 2NC just says that uncooperative federalism, GOP will help in forcing Congress. Not that after uncooperative federalism gains power, the GOP states will cooperate and not be isolationists. Trump proves that states want to be isolationists.
Okay, 7:44, starting now.
Okay, is everyone good?
What's the order? I missed it.
Oh, T.
Oh, perfect.
Shocker, I know. Okay. Anyone not good? Their interpretation is a limit disaster. They've conceded all the techniques which are death penalty, the international modeling, and legal prison responsible for this has an habeas protection, but both advantage are protected on judicial independence and court power instead of why habeas is good. So courts counterplans are impossible to fight with a Fourth Amendment legal president themselves on recitation Chevron with exec flex can be true of any legal president. Anything dangerous can claim a free speech advantage on the First Amendment, prison labor advantage on the 13th Amendment, eye law advantage by letting judicial review, etc. Most are T through Congress, so they can't win an overlimiting claim, but the proliferation of court-related advantages are not in the criminal justice lit, so we control topic education and unique angles against court generators nullifies their functional limits claim that overstretches the limits explosion impedes case-specific research and clash significantly favors the ahead because of asymmetric research vendors. They've considered the entire impact portion, so if we win a risk of predictability, that's sufficient to outweigh the first argument is we meet outside of a vacuum. That's obviously not true from the definitions. The evidence in the context of a court rule that's less predictable, also because it's a court definition which is only setting a dictionary means it's not predictable in the context of the debate. Also into the largely below on the Philo evidence of they see this is also a blip in the 1 AR, so they can't blow it up in the 2 AR. They see the plain text in a vacuum. You should prefer positional competition. You determine how you determine if they are based on what they defend earlier in the round. First is that else they explodes limits because they can attack on any resolutional wording to any chemical act, i.e. they can read Saudi Arabia attack on a criminal justice reform and enact and then death is talkable under their interpretation because the plain text in the vacuum would only effectuate criminal justice, but then for the entire debate they can they can talk about Saudi Arabia at the same time. It also a spike offense makes it impossible to everyone talking elite. Think about what would happen if we went for the politics system in this way. We would have it's impossible to go for T and substance, and the 2 AR would have been 5 minutes of law. We are the courts makes it impossible for them to everyone. So even if they win a small versus the arbitrariness offense, it's sufficient to outweigh because it literally makes being negative and impossible uniqueness always below the arbitrary positional competition is not arbitrary because it determines how people prepare and how people engage, which is how most debates happen. They see to point there's no impact to it, especially mixing burdens, there's no impact regardless. But our offense obviously outweighs when I see cross-sex when I a long rant about how it doesn't matter if they're Congress and how they wouldn't effectuate anything, which only proves their offense, but it's not mixing burdens because it relates to everything in the debate. It's not in a vacuum and it connects to everything else in the debate. You vote negative on presumption if they're Congress, you vote negative on presumption if they're Congress because 1 or 2 lives is not substantiated by any 1AC evidence, and they have no reason why that would be good, or they have nothing in the 1AC that was clear or anything that would means that that's a sufficient condition to vote affirmative, or if that is true, then there's also just a likely risk they'd be wrong. So vote negative on presumption if they are the Congress. They counter-interpretation framing issue for the entire predictability is that they have said that their definitions are fantastic and awesome, but they have done zero comparative analysis oriented in any of our cards. U.S. courts is more predictable because it's from a U.S. court, but not defining in a specific court case, but goes back to the text of the Constitution. It says in lawmaking it is specific to enacting courts. That's to enacting law. They need to. They say they only need to win a small risk in order to win. No, they don't, because they need to win. There's a higher risk of their definitions being correct than our definitions in order to win, because we'll win competing interpretations below. But because topic evidence just outweighs because it's literally deleting the negative from the topic. The right evidence is they're talking about a court rule, which they've considered the Logsberg Index, which means that it cannot Logsberg Index, which means it's common law, not criminal law, which is why it's not a predictable stasis point. I don't need to do anything else because that wasn't in the 1 AR. They consider the rehab that proves as immigration, not criminal justice. That matters because it's setting a court case in which it is not defining criminal justice, which is the courts do not make definitions, but they simply cite dictionaries and then say that those would be good. That means in the context of the resolution, we're saying more predictable definitions. They've also the Northwestern evidence proper because they've considered the Philo evidence. So that means the enacting only mean law, even if there's a distinction between enacting reform and enacting justice. It's not that comparison. It's not define enact to not mean law, which means that in the context of the resolution, they can only do law. That's more predictable because it cites 4 dictionary definitions, which is more predictable, which is above. And their evidence is just terrible. It's in 1921. The legal norms have changed, and it's just and also they consider the thing that it is citing is actually a negative argument because the case that is citing says that there's a demarcation between judicial and court and Congress power, which disproves that law explorers a sense of a clear definition, which is considered the overlimiting stuff. They're not going to go for any of the standards because they do no comparative analysis. Consider all of it overlimiting. They consider that it's good for innovation, and all the stuff, all the case list above is distinct from it because it's about advantages, not affirmatives. The ESR stuff, they consider movements, funding, modeling, etc. They didn't contextualize how ESR beats those because you cannot get a movement. Look at how Woodward is whacking everyone, threatening everyone with the movements of NRCC. And also, if it's the states stuff, if states are so bad, you'll beat them on theory. It's not unwinnable, and you can straight the benefit. Or or you can choose to benefit or read a federal estimate. They are true simply for competing in terms. Else causes charge duration. Else causes charge duration. Functional limits. No, free. Charge duration. Else causes charge duration. There's no defense to this, and they've considered T as substance, so there's no impact to substance crowd because learning about talking about topicality definitions, the process of enactments, and we can export those. So there's nothing bad about debating about topicality. Our offense outweighs. We're more predictable. That controls ground and limits because it's how people prepare.
We have 226 left.
Just T. Is anyone not ready? Great. Please verbally let me know. Great. If Memoronic wasn't ready to be a court staff on the CER topic, they weren't ready to be the varsity division air on the side of leniency. First off, they 1 hour warrants. The 1 in C on T was 30 seconds. The block was 3 minutes. The 200 is magically 5 minutes, which is definitionally 4.5 whole minutes of brand new extrapolation. The 200 need not be protected because the 200 is the most time for a speech and debate. I'm going for the counter because these standard courts are topical. Right has an intent to find sites trends in 3 distinct federal districts, including Thompson v. Bell, which is a federal sentencing case where courts enacted law. Phillips says even if courts don't enact law, they enact reform the rulings in the context of criminal justice reform. I'm going to go for our offense first and foremost. They mishandle over limit. They exclude racial profiling cases about the 4th Amendment. Right to warrantless searches here. That's central litigated over decades and is central to the literature on sentencing. They exclude the 14th Amendment right to equal protection that comes in the criminal justice cases about sentencing disparity, excluding core of the topic cases like EBS mandatory minimums, habeas for the convenience of research in defense. They're literally carving out the sentencing portion of the topic, which relies on courts. They dropped an outer limit, doesn't outweigh over limit, conceded for the 1 year that even if the topic somewhat biased, arbitrary limits divorce from the topic, literature are quote less predictable, overcorrecting zeros fairness. fairness. They say the primary concern of the tiebreaker is, quote, topic education. Direct is driven by competitive incentives, but has no value over checkers or soccer. It doesn't reflect controversy in the rule. Finally, the counter doesn't underlimit even the topics large. We only had one more after excludes a court executive agency apps where the worst thing is happening and leave the sacraments against every app and functional limits like abolition, corners, bad affirmatives. The litmus test is not to prove that some courts affirmatives are not topical, but that all courts affirmatives in every instance is not topical. Our rulemaking card, our Marcus evidence is fantastic. Prefer the USFD official definitions and appellate court definitions because they're official definitions that are about legality and in practice, not just dictionary definitions like the Random House, which obviously is less predictable because it's not the legality, which is how the plans are put in place and how we're researching, because that's what the plan is happening. The plan is a legal policy. Litmus test is every court staff is not topical, but they dropped court rulemaking. The Marcus evidence says that court rulemaking and their evidence, the Rosebud evidence, says that court rulemaking was given to the court as power of reform by Congress. That takes out the rule, not law evidence, because Wright says court rules are law. That's the right evidence. I'm going to go down the right evidence real quick. Right is sufficient. JD candidate is sufficient qualifications. Writes in a peer-reviewed journal. Fact checked by law for side decisions, including Thompson v. Bell, which isn't just about immigration. It is about sentencing cases, not only about immigration, cites other federal circuit decision and a CJR case, which is the only thing that matters now. Wright says rules are law. Cites Black law relevant because topic says enact reform, not laws. Phillips is the only card about CJR says judicial policy and reform. Even rulings are law. Their judicial enact means law definition is bad because it's not enact reform. Enact reform means just some change, not just enacting, not just the implicit definition of enacting, and it's not entirely exclusive because it's not about enact reform. I'll do the res context debate here. The resolution doesn't say enact law or just enact, but rather enact criminal justice reform in the context of enact reform. We've read the only evidence about rulemaking being reform, which is the litmus test, because reform is in the resolution, and that they've dropped that courts can engage in rulemaking, which changes a procedural rule for the federal rules of procedure about habeas corpus. That's the Justia evidence. Being able to enact reforms, we're more contextual to criminal justice and reform. There's three implications. First, they haven't met the burden of proof. The red says enact reform, but all negative features are kind of enact in a vacuum. If you have any uncertainty of the red's context debate, vote app. P7 for the complete topicality argument. Imagine if the negative finds substantial healthcare and substantial criminal justice reform. That's a hot L2 for aims reasonability. Any other trip is the worst form of subsequent. The generic index of reasonability or answer means that can always shift goalposts and interpolates more to judging differences. They rely on just arbitrarily applying a definition, not about the resolution 3 game over. The 208 drops. They frame predictability means they have zero predictability because it's not about the resolution. I'm going for ESR for flexibility. Functional limits like ESR. They drop pseudo agent specification and pseudo cheaty spec because judges are allowing to give them in the CJR topic, which fiats out of every reason why it doesn't solve. You can fiat more funding. You can fiat changes in policy and changes in reform. Net ground doesn't outweigh AF ground. We should strive for a balance. One error says Congress only breaks the topic in favor of the negative. They're right. The topic is AF side bias, means judges are willing to hear less legitimate versions of the state's kind of which quote corners affirmative set sufficient functional limit. They only answer DSR, not states, which is part of the USFG, and it doesn't have any key words because states can fiat out of them, but without court devolve plus uniform crushes every Congress affirmative. Overcorrecting zeros fairness, they say the primary concern. Only court precedent just give the after fighting chance. The movements affirmative is obviously solved by better court local initiatives by the states. No answer means that you shouldn't intervene for them. They say process and enactment can be explored. There is an impact to substance crowd because it gets rid of any education. They say nitty gritty. No, we don't learn about. We have the same debate over and over. We had this debate 3 times and I haven't learned anything new because we haven't been talking about the topic. In the end, they say they also ESR is definitely there's also an AF flex impact argument here. AFs need flexibility that the courts have in order to be able to win, even if common law isn't the same as criminal law. Both can be enacted reform. Congress is not key. We have a nice executive campaign versus where drop judges are open to cheating counterparts. There, real evidence doesn't answer the one-year Thompson when the court explicitly says that courts can enact reform, which is legal definitions for a legal plan.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate, you all.
I'm assuming you want a card back.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
I sent out the card doc.
8-minute warning on the decision deadline. 8 minutes. Thank you. Five-minute warning for decisions. 5 minutes. Thank you. Hearn, how much time do you need?
I'm submitting right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Congrats to both teams on a great tournament. The decision was 2-1 for the AF from North Broward. I voted neg. So I kind of saw this as a race to predictability. I think both teams have a pretty persuasive offensive claim that is countered with middling defense. Neg has a great limits DA. It's going to be rough sledding for the Neg dealing with limit explosion. Not like, but the AF has a pretty solid AF ground, it just said. Although the 2AR, I'm not sure why he wasted time on like the topic education thing at the top. It's going to be tough sledding, sending debaters into battle with movements and funding solvency deficits against the ESR counterplan, which was a pretty weak defense. But there's not a lot of comparison between the two. And even more importantly, both final rebuttals actually say at one point that predictability trumps all else because it'd be arbitrary and unable to set a precedent or limit otherwise. And not only does this comport with my kind of bias for how topicality is most logically understood, it is actually, I think, inescapable then to just conclude that there's another way to decide the central piece of offense in the debate. And so I just basically try to assess from the neutral perspective of like a good faith researcher determining what the most predictable and reasonable interpretation of the topic is, like the most kind of, and really like enter that as reasonability argument, even though I use the word reasonable. So starting from like what the best card is, it's, I think by far this piece of Philo evidence. And I thought that 2NR was kind of persuasive on this. It's kind of the gold standard of what you need in this. It says that an act means to inject a legal or technical understanding in violation of clear constitutional canons, and then anything else is in violation of constitutional canons. It cites like every dictionary, and the 2NR kind of had that whole list. And it then kind of goes on to be like, while people can define it differently, they're kind of wrong in terms of like the technically accurate definition of what the most reasonable interpretation of both legal usage and common usage would entail. Now, you know, the F definitely, I think, could have gone a little farther here on, you know, if so many people use it incorrectly, then, you know, it just takes one or two to set up your burden of proof argument. But this setup to me kind of answers all that, which is just like, look, this is a technical kind of question. Your cards are kind of using it imprecisely. And, you know, the best piece of AF offense by far is, you know, this court enacted rules are different than court enacted laws. Too many of your cards are about laws. Court enacted rules, we actually have these cards that are like, hey, they kind of use sentencing, they kind of use reform. We have this resolutional synergy that's like, there's like a kind of special carve out of court enacted stuff that is not accounted for by your general definitions. Their piece of Statsky evidence is kind of persuasive in response to this. It defines act just across the board, enact starkly as across the board as to pass or adopt a rule after someone has proposed it. And it says something like, yeah, courts do enact things in the sense that if somebody has told them to do something, they like then adopt the rule and pass judgment on it accordingly, but they do that in response to the initial actor telling them what to do. And so like just going through your cards here, and you know, the 2NR doesn't go through all of these, but like, to be honest, like the word habeas is not in the 1AR. A lot of this context stuff, like, well, it's there, it's like very light, you don't cite kind of by evidence. And so the 2NC does go through every card and then kind of like cites that broadly in the 2NR. That's enough for me here to kind of go through it and see if he's right. Your Phillips evidence says Supreme Court enacts rules of procedure, which they've been given statutory authorization to do so by Congress. Murphy doesn't use the term reform. It just says the Supreme Court is implementing a rule that Congress has literally given them. The Tyler evidence is like just worthless. It was only 4 words, but 4 wasted words. The Justia 1 evidence is Supreme Court enacted the rules that courts are able to apply with reference to random U.S. code statute that's authorizing. And so without the plan having authorizing legislation, without that kind of existing, because the reform has to be, something new that Congress hasn't done, the question is, can courts act by themselves as a topical enactment? It seems like the most reasonable response is no. The Northwestern 21 card sets the argument up that you want to have here, but you don't answer almost any of the indicts, including that this is citing a piece of evidence that kind of goes the other way. It's from 1921. And without that card, you don't have really much evidence that court enacted rules are something that's a reasonable characterization of what the plan does. It would have been nice if the neg kind of made, at least my kind of take on this, separate from stuff is court enacted rules. It seems like those are just procedural processes for how courts make decisions about making decisions. They're non-substantive, they're procedural. And so that kind of can't be reform is probably an easy thing for the neg to define. But even without them saying that, they, I think, indict this card enough and are just none of the stuff is reform that I can't really explain how this is a tenable or predictable interpretation. Is Wright a terrible card? No, but it's not even close to the compounded predictability that I assess the negative is accessing. And so that was how I decided to debate. There's a few more weeds. I thought the AF also, this is kind of just probably a me bias, but maybe plain text in a vacuum would have been a pretty easy sell in a debate where the neg doesn't have a clear standard. And it's positional competition bad because there's multiple contrary positions. It's impossible to resolve literally no. It just kind of seems like a crush. And I would have been a pretty easy sell for that, but I'll let the others go now.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Karen that I think both sides are winning sort of a link to their offense, but no impact calculus or comparison between the two, which makes specifically the predictability and arbitrariness question very confusing for me. But I voted affirmative more so on the overlimiting, less so on predictability and arbitrariness. I think the best argument is just voting for T enact overcorrects the imbalance and means the AF will just lose to sort of every agent counterplan. I think this starts off early in the cross-ex. I think North Broward sets it up well. I think the 2AR is pretty good on this. The movements deficit, I'm unsure I agree with the 200R's notion that movement smacks agent counterplans. That argument is first of all, the impact to it is close to, is not great. And additional planks obviously resolve it. That argument combined with sort of the 2AR impact framing that flips your calculus, that's the topic is so bad that judges are open to cheating, they're open to any process counterplan, et cetera, which means that the affirmative needs some semblance of a deficit to counterplans. Arbitrariness, definitely agree with Karen here. My biggest issue going either way with this, and probably the reason we didn't conclude the same way, is impact calculus is low. There's no evidence comparison in the 2NR and 2AR closely enough to sort of, for me to go back and deconstruct the evidence. You're saying your authors with little explanation of that in context of the other sides. And so then I sort of am just over limiting versus limits. So the negative impact of limits is honestly higher than I expect at the end of the debate. I agree that there's a limit explosion that does impede case specific research. Obviously, I don't find it untenable for the negative. And I do find that AF ground outweighs. I think more impact calculus on if AF ground versus neg ground outweighs makes this far easier. Which limited topics versus unlimited topics were good or not is something that needs to be discussed, especially when you have examples like the immigration and the education topic and tons of topics where T courts debates occurred. And I just think there should be more discussion on either side of just how did having court staffs in those soft left topics where neg ground was terrible, what did it change? How did it influence things? Sort of the equivalent of when people are just the healthcare topic was better, but for high school. In terms of neg advice here, I'd say, okay, so I think that sort of the T enact stuff is fine. I do think that the 2NR, when you're just at the bottom of the flow and you're just I'm not answering over limiting, God knows why, I don't remember the justification. That's where things started getting messy for you on my ballot, right? Because I can cross apply your limits overview to that on the movements deficit, but it just allowed them so much more extrapolation from what the 1AR even said. It allowed them to cross apply cross-ex, just a lot going on there that I think would have been better for you to sort of just have more contextualization there. In terms of just other nitpicky stuff about the debate, the 13 off strategy, for me, totally unnecessary. I think you're like already marking cards on like every single one of these things. You're like clearly not ready to finish it. And I do think it spreads yourself like a little bit thin for the block. You're extending things wrong. You're forgetting the net benefits, stuff like that, that I just think is unnecessary because you all clearly have like the technical skill to not do that. And then, but like even without that context, I think reading defense to the advantage was a mistake. Okay, so like my confusion here is like the 2NR has to be a counterplan that solves the AF, T, or the turn. So extending defense is not part of any of these 2NRs. So like, you know, it opens up the opportunity for North Broward to get rid of the turn, and it also wastes your time. In terms of like AF advice, so I think the affirmative definitely needs more impact calculus on why arbitrariness matters. Why does it outweigh limits? Like you're far ahead, like in my opinion, you're ahead on the link to predictability, but making the debate like really close on the impact. Like why is an imprecise limit bad if indeed that limit solves like clash and provides greater access to net ground? And I think key arguments here are tied to like reasonability, arbitrary substance, crowd out, punish the topic committee, not the AF-esque arguments. I think more functional limits args about why you're better for the neg are key when you're going for arbitrariness and all of these impacts, because you need to win more defense to their limit stuff that's outside of AF ground. And I think functional limits is a good place here. It's obviously a stretch, but it's like a far better argument than like, yeah, just go one off abolition, right? Like that's never been compelling to anyone. So I think saying something like, you know, like you have to identify why the topic sucks, right? Like the neg is always going to rant about why it sucks. Find out why. And the reason usually is like the affirmative is blatantly a good idea. The status quo sucks and minor changes are good. Courts require wholesale changes, right? They shift much larger differences from the status quo. Habeas corpus, the First Amendment, international law are huge uniqueness shifts, which I'm sure like you all can package that into like a reason why that provides for better disad ground, even if you have to cut that disad for like 2 hours someday. Plan text in a vacuum, like honestly, when Kahan was explaining it, I'm tracking the argument more. In the debate, I found it pretty stupid. Like, I don't know. I personally don't like that argument. I thought the 2-hour move was obviously to go for this. I think like there's obviously no presumption, but the time splitting to an argument to me is just true. And like clearly all of your advantages are premised off of the court. And yeah, that was sort of my thought on the functional limit stuff. I think maybe it could be explained better because honestly, when Karen said it, I was following it more closely, but I didn't vibe with the whole like presumption thing. Like it seemed like one of those like try to be big brain things that like didn't make too much sense to me. And then for the 1AR, I think like you can kick court power, get out of this turn, concede the all causes on like Gitmo, capital, whatever, extend your other advantage. Like I don't know if you all have a distinction that can get you out of judicial independence. I obviously have not read your AF very intricately because none of your debates I've judged you in have involved the advantage. But like if there is a way to like explain judicial independence by getting around these alt causes, I think kicking that like obviously the turn I do think you all can answer and that's fine, but then you just have like a ton of 1AR time to destroy T and destroy the NGA counterplan. But obviously that's up to you. That's just something I was thinking about through the 1AR on how to like allocate your time differently.
So I largely agree with what's been said by both, though obviously my ballot was a bit more similar to AU's. I overall thought that there was a higher risk of the over-limiting offense than the neg predictability offense. Important for me, I thought that the neg predictability offense was lower risk given, a lack of 2NR impact contextualization, though we all kind of agreed predictability is important, but also because I don't think that the neg ever dealt with the argument about the court enacted rules. Obviously the 1AR, as was mentioned, was a bit light on this, but I still thought that the 2NR needed to respond to the argument that even if other courts asked are not like within the confines of the resolution, because per the Morris evidence, federal courts interpret and apply law, there was little refutation to the idea that courts can enact rules per the 1AC Marcus and Justia evidence. Since habeas stems from like a court enacted rule, it seems within the court's jurisdiction to enact reforms to rulemaking. So it's the most predictable interpretation of the topic. And I think that this also got you in, like we talked about this because TNACT was in the block in the last debate and said that it's kind of important to deal with this like enacted rule versus rulings and interpretation distinction. And I didn't really think that that was in this debate either. The resolutional context argument somewhat factored into my decision because I thought it also just kind of cut back against the neg predictability offense. The Northwestern evidence distinguishes enact law as more of a legislative function, but when a term just uses enact without the law, it's a separate question. I agree that the 2AR really should have responded to more of the kind of 2NR indicts, but some of the indicts that were like, it's from 1921 was not sufficient for me to beat back the warrants that were still extended in the 1AR and 2AR. And also like the AF has read more recent evidence in cases that seem to mirror that concept. I also thought that the prodites of Wright were compelling. It doesn't matter as much to me that he's a JD candidate since he's citing court cases, cites plain meaning like the best neg evidence does, and then it's from a peer-reviewed published journal. I was somewhat sympathetic to the neg defense to the over limits ground arguments given how tough it is to be neg on this topic, but I think the risk of that offense is higher given the low predictability offense and some strong functional limits. I asked myself if the ESR counterplan and states counterplan are sufficient limit in a world where courts are topical, and I think so, but I think absent courts, teams can get away with fighting out of deficits, and having strong court precedent advantages is the only way the affirmative can win against these counterplans. Like AU, I thought that the 2NR should have spent less time on plan text in a vacuum. I could not see myself voting on that argument given just some of the like 1AR moral hazard, like time split arguments. And I think more time establishing like a clear impact to predictability, answering the enact rules argument, and a bit more impact comparison between predictability and the like limits and ground push that the AF also makes would be helpful. I agree with Cahern, just like a couple extra thoughts. I thought that the 2AR should not have talked about topic education at all. I thought the 2AR was also a bit organized. It would have been really helpful if you would have been like, this is our over limiting offense, and then I'm gonna extend so much defense to like predictability stuff. Like if I went indicts of their evidence, prodites of our evidence, then like the over limiting stuff outweighs because I just have to answer these like functional limits claims. I also thought the 1AR would have benefited from reading more evidence generally on the turn on topicality, because right now the neg, I mean, I guess you have like a whole 1AC contention about T, but still. A couple extra neg comments that I just wanted to say. I thought that you were in a tough position after the block. I just thought that the turn was untenable given the 1NR just reading like uniqueness cards on an impact turn debate, like need more impacts aside from you. And obviously the NGA counterplan was pretty messy. So it did make sense to go for T in the context of this debate. But I think just given the changes that I explained, I think about answering the enact rules argument, which was more relevant to my decision than the others, like in more impact comparison would have been helpful in getting my ballot.
What did y'all think about an NGA 2NR?
It's like staff. I mean, most of the 1AR was pretty meh. Like this is the worst perm I've ever heard because it is literally a textually intrinsic and functionally intrinsic perm. The whole point of it is to be textually non-intrinsic. You have to like use a variant of the plan text that does a different action. So like in this context, you could say the United States federal government should enact substantial reform in corpus procedure. Corpus procedure is literally about dead bodies, has nothing to do with habeas corpus. The writ, it's a completely different procedure. The states will bargain over that, and we do the plan. That's the perm you're trying to set up. But you know, that's functionally intrinsic. You say it's functionally intrinsic in other issues, of course it is, but other is not a word in the plan or the counterplan text, so it's also textually intrinsic, and so it's actually just kind of a. That's what I mean. Like it's really just not justified in any world. But it's a court's F. I mean, what you're telling the Supreme Court, like, all right, look here, court, we're the states. We're going to tell you to make a decision, and we're gonna stop cooperating with the federal government if you don't do so, because that's how justice works in the United States now. I mean, they don't have to say a lot, and they maybe just said enough in the 1AR. I think I'm probably a little bit more open than most people would be to like this 1AR did not quite make that argument. It was unclear the argument that it made, and so like err against being able to make any of this. They had the easiest argument to make in the world, and they didn't get to, like maybe, but that just seems like a pretty high risk proposition. And like honestly, outside of like maybe a spec, this was like probably one of the arguments that was least persuasive in the 1NC, just kind of from its core conception. Too much agent counterplan stuff. Like the only thing that's good about this AF is that it has agent defenses. That's the whole point. Like doesn't do or say anything. And so even just like little things like having more on flex so that there's kind of like more development, you know, more links, which shouldn't be too hard to find. And then like more court disads. Okay, two other quick things for the negative. Number one, just for the plan text in a vacuum thing, for me, just like the arbitrariness problem is like a big one, because even if you're right that it feels like a court staff, you know, how do you know? There are ways to assess habeas reform through Congress, clearly. You just got to propose a standard. Like you got to figure out like how we know what the AF is, because USFG could be anything. a very easy one. Like you say positional competition. That's like a good start. I need a little bit more. A very like the go-to test is that you can be like AF writes tags. That is them taking a position on what the structure of the argument is or entails. Of the, let's see, 23 header classes that are tags in the 1AC, 4 say court or make a clear reference to the court. And this is just in the, before they've read 17 T cards that say the court's topical, which is a separate position kind of in the 1AC as well. They have said 0 that imply otherwise. They have taken a position that the courts is the actor of the plan. This is preferable to plan text in a vacuum for the reasons you preferred. Like now we have a debate, but it's just like you need that initial interpretation, or I'm left with this kind of, at least to me, irresolvable arbitrariness conundrum. And yeah, could be better at explaining that, but in this debate, it actually was there just enough for me. I mean, you don't need to say a ton if the neg doesn't have a slightly better response. And like, it's not so crazy to me that habeas corpus sentencing done through Congress is just like a neg on presumption thing. They have solvency evidence that is not really talking. It just like says generally this is good, it's desirable people, even though they're in prison for basically stuff that the government has no proof for. They have to stay in jail. We should perform that sentencing process. That's like, I don't know, just me maybe. But the last thing is just in terms of like being persuasive on going for like TNAC stuff in the future. You definitely could have been better. So like, I think I gave you, like the way I ultimately assessed things kind of came down in your favor, but some of that assessment language is what you want to use in your speech to make it work. So you want to say stuff like, for all this court enacted rule stuff, you don't really say clearly. You said like our cards say that their cards are wrong, but you didn't explain that rules have a very precise meaning. First comes the law, then comes the rule. Somebody enacts a law, and then you can enact a rule, if you're a court, that procedurally basically figures out the technical details or legal debate about the rule itself. Courts can enact rules. They do. That's what they're for. But they cannot. But court enacted rules can't be topical as reform because those don't have somebody passing authorizing legislation and being like, do this. Maybe you can do courts plus Congress as a topical actor, but that's just the court ruling the congressional plan is constitutional. It is not the courts enacting initial reform. And so kind of use, like, I actually think their cards support that narrative for you. And so kind of like take back the reform stuff and explain that accordingly. But yeah, that's my main thing for the negative. Also, the links are in the 1AR. You needed to answer that. I would have just extended that in the 1AR and kind of moved on for the Flex GA.
Yeah, I was going to say on the NGA counter plan, I did think it was the better 2NR. I actually thought North Broward was in a lot of trouble on the AGA counter plan, surprisingly, because I think the like say no argument is obvious and true. I think you are like accidentally making the argument, but I'm sure that I don't think you all were like actually saying like the court would obviously just be like no to the states. And so my issue here is like also with the intrinsic perm, but for the neg, like I think you all need to point this out in the block too. Like you're just like, this is intrinsic. It adds the element of time. I think you getting ahead and sort of pointing out like which part, like functional intrinsicness versus textual, like, that's where the 1AR is headed, right? Like they're going to try to make a distinction between the two. It's neither. So pointing that out then, like, I mean, still, I think this was a viable 2NR because again, I don't even know. I guess the 2AR is like either say no or this like Milko card you read in the 2AC that it is clearly extended. But yeah, I think that definitely get ahead on sort of the intrinsicness question by making those distinctions in the 2NC. But I still do think you were set up for this counter plan better so than you were for TNACT.
Yeah, I mean, both teams had terrible ethos how this counter plan. It was actually kind of funny. Like the block, you're like, oh, not only did I forget the net benefit, you in the 1AR, Veronica, you're like, did you answer the one argument they made that like this counter plan's kind of backwards now because Biden's the president? And he's like, oh shit, we have no answer to that at all. Yeah, we're just gonna pretend that doesn't exist. And the 1AR is like, intrinsic perm, baby. And nothing else very clear or persuasive. So it would have been a fun one to resolve.
Yeah, I think you all both have to like make choices in that sense. Like if the NGA counterplan is like that aggressively of an afterthought in the block that you forget the net benefit, like come on, like let's restructure the 1NC, let's restructure the block, let's have consistent 2NR thought. And then for the AF, same thing. Like we talked about this the last time I judged you, but like making choices in the 1AR, right? Like you don't need to extend like the intrinsic perm in 3 solvency deficits, right? Like extend your best solvency deficit, write a better perm and then extend it. And then as same thing on the case, like, like the 1NR reads like uniqueness cards on this stuff, use their only impact, doesn't have answers to it. And then the link turn, and then you all read more cards after a link turn is dropped, like stuff like that, like, I guess like, I don't know if it's a confidence thing or like a being bold thing, but like make more choices to like get more time elsewhere, because otherwise it's just like, you're chasing the ink, like you're covering every component, but like there's no consistent, it looks like an afterthought. It looks like you're extending stuff accidentally because like there's no consistent idea of what the 2AR big picture is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I was just going to say, can I email you all for future questions?
I have one more question. This is kind of like broader, like less about the debate round, but versus court staff, or like, I guess maybe in this round, like, what do you think the block split should have been, or what do you think the 1NC should have looked like or cut down on?
I mean, there are definitely more court disads out there. Besides court politics, like some of them are going to be kind of dumb. Your sua spontes and other kind of process-based internal links to legitimacy style arguments, political responses like court packing, and there's all kinds of against like court power apps. There are like kind of old school back files that shouldn't even be that hard to find online or on old wikis for just like JI bad, Congress solved judicial independence better, like via pay raises. And so given that it's just like an agent F, there's kind of, so many little agent counterplans and agent counterplan that benefit tricks to add against that. Like against this F, I would say definitely include Congress advantage counterplan. That's just like Congress does stuff to empower the judiciary. And the cards that are like, that's actually better because courts all say they're powerful. They literally say this is the law. But if other branches, especially the ones that ultimately have political power, don't respect them, that's what undermines them and makes them seem non-independent and stripped of power. You could add like democracy kind of planks to that as well. And then just like pretty much any court capital, court packing, court legitimacy, sua sponte disads, net benefit to that. Like you can go way deeper into, judicial sunsets and sunbursting and ex parte merriment, but yeah, just there's a whole world of courts generics out there just waiting to be exploited.
Yeah, I don't have really thoughts on the content just because I don't know much about the topic. For me, it was more the structure of the block, and I think like something to think through is like, I think having 2 2NRs is like really what you want to have, in like 2 solid 2NRs rather than like 4 shadow extended ones. And I think like you all have to analyze, like, do you want to debate the case? Do you not want to debate the case? Because here it's like you're debating the case, but none of your offensive 2NR options like require that, right? The counterplan solves the case and T obviously. So it's confusing. Otherwise, I guess the impact turn, but then you don't need defense because you're biting the internal link. And so I think like having those 2 options. So like, for example, if like one of these Congress advantage counterplans and then the disad, like doing like Congress advantage counterplan, the case in the 2NC, and then putting the disad in the 1NR, or doing like T 1 advantage in the 2NC, making the 1NR the impact turn or a process counterplan. And I think just like that sets you up to read more cards on like every component of the debate and less so have to reconstruct the debate in the 2NR, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll add, I also haven't done a ton of topic research. I think that from a perspective of like court disads, in my opinion, I think court clog is probably a bit better than this like mansion disad or court politics. So I would have preferred reading that instead of those disads. And then also I think against this AF, instead of reading like the abolition K, like security K, or there's really good, like they have a whole advantage about democracy, like the Ks of democracy aren't bad. So I think that, not that I'm like deep in that lit, but reading that might have been a bit better than like the abolition K, like warranted more of a 2AC response than maybe some of the other like off that you had thrown in there.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Good luck. North Bernard.
Last thing, I forgot to mention this earlier on T. The Congress solved T deficits. You got to do a little bit of a better job on that. Like, while the AF, their big mistake, I will say, definitely go for like AF ground first and don't say predictability first. But for you, like you were kind of weak on Congress is bad, basically the whole debate. I feel like this is just like not all that true. I mean, the examples you picked were like so like cartoonishly silly. Like Woodward is probably not my go-to example of like a policing kind of AF, like that's just unbeatable. You could just be like, literally, your initial impulse, which I think was just antitrust, like any area in which a future president could make a decision that changes whether or not a law is enforced would be an effective deficit. Like the structure of status quo, there's a criminal penalty for something. If the president is like, I'm not going to enforce that, we're never going to enforce that, but it's still illegal, in the future, you could be put in prison for doing that thing just because the current administration is not enforcing it. And so if you're like a corporation, especially like making billion-dollar decisions in the long-term trajectory there, it's like pretty easy to set that up. And almost every like tech or econ sector AF like makes that argument up. Like it's not that hard to set up a Congress key warrant just abstractly, I think. And so, but funding and especially movements are not where I'm good. All right, sorry.
All right, good debate, you all. Thanks.
Good job, everyone.
Good debate, you all. Good luck. Thank you all for judging.